Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are talking about the Detroit Pistons and what their potential plan for the future may look like after a season that has very obviously not gone the way that they were hoping for. So, we'll get the bad part out of the way immediately. The Pistons are a historically bad team. They are currently 3-33 at the time of recording, and they previously had lost 28 consecutive games. That set a record for most consecutive losses in a single season, and it tied the overall record for most consecutive losses in general across seasons. So this team is very bad. They suck in one of the worst ways possible. They seem to have talent and potential on their roster, but they simply can't take advantage of it, and they can't win any games. If you look at their statistics, I'm not going to actually list the exact numbers, but they are below average in scoring, below average in overall field goal percentage, three-point shooting, rebounding, assists, turnovers, fouls, etc. Most offensive categories, they are in the lower sections, while also being one of the worst teams in the league in terms of their defense as well. So they're bad on both sides of the ball, even in games that are close-ish, winnable, even if you were someone other than the Pistons, they still can't really manage to pull it out, right? So the Pistons are pretty bad. So what's the problem here, right? And the answer is there's a lot of problems. The players, the coaching, the way the team's constructed in general, all of that contributes. But today we're going to focus on the roster construction just a little bit more, right? Because it's become relatively apparent that the Pistons are not really all that bad at drafting, but they're also not great either. They're not quite getting that full value out of some of their draft picks. If you look at some of the guys that they have on the roster, you see what I mean by not being bad at drafting. They've got guys like Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, Isaiah Stewart, Asar Thompson. They're all varying levels of sort of good, useful guys with potential, right? And all of those players were either drafted by the Pistons directly, or Detroit swung a trade for them shortly after they were drafted, and in most cases before they actually played any games for their original teams. So the Pistons clearly can identify guys who have some sort of talent and potential. The problem is, other than Cade Cunningham, the potential hasn't quite developed into a true sort of second star status, right? Cade is far and away the best player on that team. He's an all-star. Kind of hard to argue about that since he's come back from his injury. But there is no number two guy on the Pistons right now. And just to sort of backtrack on the drafting note that I mentioned, they did get Cade, but Cade was the number one pick. That it didn't really take too much deliberation from the Pistons to just sort of take the best guy off the board with the first pick. So, long story short, the Pistons have a single sort of tier one guy in Cade, and unfortunately, somewhere in the realm of 5 to 6 guys in that tier 2 to tier 3 range, that just won't win you games, as we have seen. They've only won 3 on the season. So, what's the solution? If you don't have a second star for Cade, the solution is you need to go and get one rather than wait for one to suddenly appear from amongst the guys that you've drafted. And in my estimation, there's basically 3 options here for the Pistons. Option number 1 is to give up on the current version of the roster to acquire that star. Rather than acquiring project players, rather than going after guys with potential, taking on bad trades, drafting guys who are good but not great, offload the talent you have to get the guy that you need to help Cunningham. Cade Cunningham only has 1 year left on his deal after this season, right? So this season plus 1 more. And the Pistons need to do something to convince him that he wants to either re-sign or extend long term. So you got to give up on keeping some of that potential from your young guys and trade a slew of them away for star power, right? That means guys like Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, Isaiah Stewart, right? Bogdanovich, even Asar Thompson, maybe, if I don't know what the rules are about trading guys in their sort of rookie season, but I know it is technically possible. But all of those guys need to be made available, right? Or all/any of them. If a team comes and says, hey, we want to trade you an all-star, but we want somewhere in the realm of 2 to 4 of those guys that I just mentioned, the Pistons basically have to be willing to part ways with those players. Now, the downside of this is that the current roster would be basically gutted entirely. You'd lose the vast majority of your sort of starting lineup here. But at this point, before the trade deadline, or maybe in next off season, I'm not really sure when the trade would happen if it does, but what more is there to lose? You have won 3 games on the season so far. You are, at this point, playing for a draft pick and not much else. So if you have to sacrifice your starting lineup, well, that starting lineup wasn't winning you too many games anyway. So I don't think you care much about sacrificing it. That is option 1 for the Pistons. Option 2, rather than give up on the current version of the roster and some of the perceived potential on it, you give up on the future of this team. You build around Cade and you keep some of those young guys by surrendering as many draft picks as possible to form a package. Now, because of the rules against trading first rounders in consecutive seasons and all that stuff, the Pistons would basically have to start pushing into 2029, 2030 sort of ranges to get 2 to 3 first rounders available to be traded. So you would be giving up control of half your picks for basically the rest of the decade if you do that, but by doing that, you could keep some of those players that you might have an attachment to. I say some because you probably will still need to trade at least one sort of player of note, but with the picks involved here, you know, it could maybe be 1 or 2 of those players, and you could afford to part ways with someone like that, someone like a Bogdanovich, right? So rather than trading away 3 to 4 of your young guys that you feel good about, maybe you only lose 1 or 2, you do still lose a lot. You trade away some talent, you trade away multiple picks, obviously, but the Pistons could keep some of their current project players. They could bring in a superstar to play alongside Cade Cunningham and maybe make themselves competitive for the next year or so while you're trying to secure the long-term future of Cunningham. And quite frankly, part of the problem, as I was mentioning earlier, is that the Pistons have been using their draft picks on guys who are just okay, right? Not really picking up a great player to help them move the needle. So it's kind of oversimplifying things here, but if you are sacrificing those draft picks, how much value were you getting out of them in the first place? Obviously, you can never tell, but based on the last 5 to 10 years, they weren't really getting too much when they didn't have the absolute number 1 pick to get Cunningham. So a risk they might be willing to take, but that leads us into option number 3 for the Pistons, which is to just do what they're currently doing, which is to give up on everything and effectively do nothing. The Pistons accept that they will basically never get above 500 ever again for the rest of time, and they consign themselves to basketball oblivion for all eternity. They do nothing. They continue to pin their hopes on 2 to 4 of their young players suddenly turning into all-stars over the next off-season. They believe that Cade will simply re-sign or extend without any further convincing for reasons that I could not possibly understand, and that everything just sort of magically gets better by itself. Unlikely, right? And maybe that's putting it a little bit politely, but technically speaking, it's an option for the Pistons. I do not believe it's an option they should take, but we've seen teams make strange decisions in the past. So those are the 3 options. Either trade the current talent for a star, trade less of that talent but a lot of your picks for a star, or just do nothing and continue to be one of the worst teams in the history of the NBA, apparently. But again, I sincerely hope that the Pistons aren't just going to do nothing here and wait and see, because I don't think this fixes itself. I think something needs to be done decisively to right the ship here, and not even right the ship, that's still asking too much, but to put the Pistons on some sort of road to recovery over the next couple of seasons. But I don't know. That's just my opinion on it. Please feel free to let me know what you think. Do you believe the Pistons should make a trade? If they do, which of the 2 scenarios that I outlined do you think is the more favorable one? Do you think that they should trade current talent on the lineup and keep the picks, or trade the picks away and try to build around some of the guys that they feel good about right now. What do you think the long-term prospects are for Cade in Detroit? Because as I said, it's only got one more year beyond this current season. So the future's going to get weird for the Pistons. Hopefully they make the right choices to make the most of it, but as I said, we shall see. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.